Hello and welcome to Talk Heathen. It is way less exciting when there's not a live studio audience, but regardless, it is April 5th, 2020, season 4, episode 14. And with me today is Andrew Torrez. Andrew, how's it going?
It's going fantastic, Eric. Thank you so much for having me on, man.
Oh, dude, I have been wanting to have you on since before this show started. So back before,
well, now there's nowhere I can go. So
we locked you down. So before Talk Heathen was even a thing, I reached out to you when I was trying to start a podcast, and we had a great conversation that stuck with me. And ever since then, man, it's been awesome getting to know you as a person. But for people who don't know you, Andrew, who are you?
All right. Well, I am Andrew Torrez. I co-host the Opening Arguments podcast. By profession, I am a lawyer. But like you've had my buddy Andrew Seidel on from the Freedom from Religion Foundation, right? And there are lawyers in the atheist community that deal with First Amendment issues and that are sort of on the front lines. That's not me. I represent small businesses. I just have a normal legal practice. I represent a lot of podcasts, which is a little bit weird.
LLC.
But so what I try to do is normalize that, right? Like I'm an atheist lawyer, like small a, small l, in the same way that you might have your local Christian business, and so that's sort of my part of visibility. And my show, Opening Arguments, is designed to take legal questions and issues that are in the news and sort of break them down for a non-legal audience, which there are a lot of legal stories in the news. We started in August of 2016, so we had a slightly different view that, Well, I'll leave it at that.
Well, so the thing is before ever doing shows, I was a huge fan and still am a huge fan. I followed Thomas back when he was doing Thomas in the Bible, and so when
that's how I met Thomas. So.
Yeah, yeah. So when you started Opening Arguments, I was right there following along, and I think you're selling yourself criminally short, my friend, because one thing that I deeply consider you to be an exemplar of, you did not mention at all. And that is, you are a great communicator and teacher, especially when it comes to law. Every time something has come through the Supreme Court, every single time there have been major laws that have been tried to be passed that have tried to break down the barrier between religion and government, I know that I'm going to hop on the podcast in the next episode. You're going to be talking about exactly what it is. And you get down to the nitty gritty. People who listen to your podcast actually have a better understanding of constitutional law, and that informs one of the big reasons why I'm so excited to have you on today, and that is because we had a caller. Do you happen to remember the caller from last week?
Oh yeah. So first, as long as you're embarrassing me, I listen to your show every week, and and it's why, and I love what you do. I love engaging with live callers. Not something we do on Opening Arguments. But yeah, you had a gentleman named T.E. who called in to share, and I want to be clear about this, absolute nonsense, David Barton pseudo-history about the U.S. being historically a Christian nation. And your response, your response, I think was a good response from a lay perspective, right? Was to be like, look, let me grant your argument. I don't care about history as constraining us because, right, historically, the U.S. has done a horrible lot of stuff. Yeah, right, exactly. But I want to be clear that from a legal perspective, his argument was nonsense, was garbage from start to finish. So,
well, I want to.
That's a legal term, by the way.
Well, if you want to go into a little bit more, I really do want to help inform the audience so that if Uncle Joe, decides that they want to start talking about how this has always been a Christian nation, maybe we can help arm those people who are having to sit across the table with real information. So, is there anything about that you wanted to share?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go super quickly because the best part of the show is getting to callers, and people are already going to try and fast forward over this part. But I do think it's important because there is an Orwellian 1984 style effort to rewrite history, to take what is very obviously a secular country founded on secular principles and rewrite that history as if it was based on Christian ideals. It's not true. So I want to start off with steelmanning TE's argument, right? What he said was, it's okay to teach the Bible in public schools today because the First Amendment doesn't provide for the separation of church and state. If that were true, that would have profound consequences, but it is not true. Okay. He made two arguments on the show, as I understand them. The first was that the First Amendment doesn't say separation of church and state. That's 100% true, but 100% irrelevant, right? The First Amendment doesn't say television. It doesn't say internet, right? What the Constitution does is it enshrines principles, right? And then case law helps us determine how to apply those principles 200 years later, right? So the First Amendment, as you pointed out, says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Now, there are two ways that we could go about figuring out what respecting an establishment of religion is, right? Like, we could just make stuff up and say, well, to respect religion is to do that. Or we can look to how the courts have actually interpreted what that means. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. So the fact that the words aren't in the Constitution is completely irrelevant. But that's it's weird. It's a major like Christian David Barton talking point, and I don't know why. The second argument he made was a little more subtle, but just as wrong, right? And what he said was, respecting an establishment of religion doesn't preclude teaching Christianity, because one of the founding fathers, a guy named Benjamin Rush, who, by the way, was super duper religious, right? He wrote a Bible tract in 1791 for use in public schools. And so what that proves is that the First Amendment didn't, it's this totally like weird, convoluted argument. It's a great example of what you and Matt and others at the ACA call being fractally wrong, right? Like, it's hard to overstate how wrong this argument is, okay? So let me try and break down the layers, right? Like, so the first is the sleight of hand on Rush. And you might be sitting there thinking, like, I know a lot of founding father, right? Like, I can name, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and Benjamin Franklin, and like, who the hell is Benjamin Rush, right? And the answer is that he was a guy who signed the Declaration of Independence, right? That's it. He was not at the Constitutional Convention. He didn't draft the Constitution. He didn't draft the First Amendment, right? So if you want to know what the First Amendment means from the perspective of the founding fathers, you wouldn't go to Benjamin Rush. You'd go to James Madison, and James Madison was super duper clear that the First Amendment was intended to separate church and state, right? That evidence is rock solid. So the first is there's this kind of sleight of hand of, why should we care about what Rush says anyway, right? The founding fathers were not a monolith, right? Like, they disagreed with each other all the time, and Rush wanted the Constitution to be way more religious than it is, because he was a religious dude. That proves we have a secular nation, not that it's a religious one, right? Number two, there were two public schools in the entirety of the United States in 1791, right? Like, I mean, we had two major waves of public education reform in this country. The first was in the 1840s, 1850s, and the second was with Thomas Dewey in the 20th century, right? Like, we were an agrarian economy where like kids learned how to work the farm. We didn't have public schooling back then. So there's not really much that's analogous. And then number three, and this is the biggest point, the Constitution and the First Amendment, the protections of the Bill of Rights, did not apply to the states in the 18th century, right? There's a complicated doctrine called incorporation, but at the time, those handful of public schools were run by the states, and the First Amendment, as you know, says Congress shall make no law. So the fact that the First Amendment didn't apply to the states meant unless the state had a parallel protection, it's not at all relevant to the meaning of the First Amendment for any of the founding fathers to say, oh yeah, well, this obviously wouldn't stop Massachusetts from doing XYZ, because the First Amendment did not apply to the states until 1925. And I know that's like totally counterintuitive. Today, we use the Constitution as a bulwark against oppressive state activity, and it's a good thing, but that's because of the 14th Amendment, and that wouldn't be written for 100 years. So it's just like the idea that this pseudo history tells us what the First Amendment, it just couldn't be more wrong. So anyway, sorry, soapbox over, rant over.
No,
but
okay.
But it was strikingly dishonest, and I don't know if TE knew otherwise and came on to bully you because you guys aren't lawyers, or if he's just repeating stuff that his pastor told him. But either way, he's wrong, and I hope he's watching and it calls back in.
That I would love to see that.
That would be great.
And I personally feel like I got my own little opening arguments rant here.
Mini, yeah. How long? That was what, 11 minutes? That was pretty good. Usually that'd be a show and a half. But
hey, you know what? I do not mind shilling for your show anytime. If you have not heard opening arguments, when you're finished listening to this, go and subscribe. Get that on your RSS feed, because it is informational, it's educational, and it's fun.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely, brother. All right. So we've got Atheist Vanguard at 3. And let's see. I'm a little bit off. Let me make sure that I get the regular announcements out quickly, because I know that we've been without calls for a little while. What I want to say is that Talk Heathen is a production of the Atheist Community of Austin. If you enjoy what we do, if you like it and you want to support us, please consider going to patreon.com/talkheathen-to-me. That's patreon.com/talkheathen-to-me. We've had to get a lot of different software and a lot of different programs and hardware and things to be able to outfit our hosts and make sure that they can work safely from home. And that has been coming from the support of our patrons. If you like what we do, again, patreon.com/talkheathen-to-me. Also, you'll see the link underneath for the bit.ly for the AEN merch. You can get your Talk Heathen mugs and shirts, because we have not been able to film the new intro because of COVID-19. You can still get your OG merch before we change up the logo, and it'll be gone forever. So definitely bit.ly/AEN merch. Oh, all right. Oh, and I thanked our top 5 patrons 2/3 of the way through the show.